You wait.
בוקר טוב ושבוע טוב. This is our second part about the Chazon of Avrohom, Yeshaya, Karelitz. Obviously, as with many other of the rabbis you are speaking here about, easily we could have gone for the third part and the fourth part and the fifth part and the whole series. And I showed you, I think, last week, this thick tome, right, of his biography from Professor Benjamin Brown, 1,000 pages in Hebrew. So obviously there is a lot of material here that we are skipping, but I hope that in this shiur and the one before it, we are able to get at least a glimpse of the greatness of the man and also of his times and the ways in which he shaped the Jewish world in general, and more in particular the Haredi society in Israel as we know it. And that's exactly what we are going to do today. So if last week was about his growth, because during he was born, as we said, in 1878, and he made Aliyah in 1933, so that is 55. So in his 55 years in Europe, we can say that generally speaking, he was not well known. It may be that some of the rabbis were familiar with him, more familiar with the Sefer Chazon Ish, which he authored, but he didn't put his name in print. So some people knew that he's the writer, but many people did not. And he didn't carry any formal position. So he was not known among the masses, and even among the rabbis, the Talmidei Chachamim, some knew him, but many didn't. And basically, he did what he wanted to do, which is to sit from morning, not to even to evening, but from morning to the next morning, sitting and just learning Torah, not too many people coming and bothering him with questions, and he was happy. However, as we saw, he had a wish to go to Eretz Israel, both from halachic reasons and also that would be a speculation what I'm going to say now, but I think also because he understood that if he wants to take part in the growth and in the next phase of Olam Torah, then he needs to be in Eretz Israel. Obviously, he couldn't see that the Torah centers in Europe are going to be completely destroyed in just a few years. He didn't see it, and no one other almost saw it. However, he made Aliyah, as we said, in 1933, and now that he's in Eretz Israel, he makes his residence not in Yerushalayim, but in Bnei Brak, for reasons that we have discussed last week. And in the beginning, his wife does try to, again, to establish a store, etc., but that doesn't work. And he has to make his living from selling his Sfarim. So not anymore an anonymity as there was in Europe. And also Reb Chaim Ozer tells the people that come to him or send him letters in Europe, if they are from Eretz Israel, he tells them, that's now you have a new rabbi coming in. He's an expert in anything halachic. He is I completely rely on him, so you should go to him with your questions, you should address him with your questions. And with that, Rav Avram Yeshaya Karelitz begins to grow, and his fame, you may say, his reputation begin to expand. So that's in 1933. He is also very much involved in the internal affairs of Bnei Brak, as long as it is part of halachic questions. So he is involved in shchita in Bnei Brak, he's involved in the eruv, he's involved in the mikvah, everything, but again, not as a formal position, as an advisor and a halachic counselor. So he's giving his positions, and obviously is being very much respected. In 1936, you may say 3 years after he made his aliyah, for the first time he's making a ruling that is important not only for local Bnei Brak, but make waves all around the country. And that is regarding a question that was very urgent at the day. That was the question of milking on Shabbat. So if you have cows, as any farm had in the time, and you obviously you want to milk them. And you also want to milk them on Shabbat, and this is for two reasons. One is halachically, one is financially. That is just if you milk more, there is more production of milk. So if you do not milk on Shabbat, it's not that you can milk twice on Sunday. Just you lose the milk of Shabbat, and maybe the cow also produce less milk for the first few days after the Shabbat. So that's a major financial loss. And also from the perspective of the health of the cow, it's not good for it if you do not milk it in a daily regular basis, in a set schedule. So for these two reasons, farmers wished to milk their cows on Shabbat, which is obviously an issur. There is an issur to milk a cow on Shabbat. Now, this is not a new question, obviously, that was born in 1936, yes? Yeah, so, yeah, of course, we do not use the same terms for human beings and for animals, so we do not call it a pikuach nefesh, but it's called tsar ba'alei chaim, and you're right, and as we will see, that it's something that was taken also into consideration. So, as I said, it's not a new question. Cows were not created at 1936. And also Jewish farmers, although they were rarer than cows, you may say, but also you had a few people with cows in the old country as well. However, in the old country, there was another thing. A part of Jews and cows, there were also non-Jews. Exactly, they were goyim. And in Eretz Israel also, there were plenty of non-Jews, but in Eretz Israel, you had two problems with using them. One problem was that there was an ideal of avodah ivrit, Jewish work. We just came to the land, and we do not to be as the Jews in Chutz La'aretz who are involved only in Lufthansa. We want Jews to work with their hands. That was an ideal that used to be. I don't think it exists anymore. But nowadays, every Jewish mother returned to the default, which is, I want my son to be a doctor or a lawyer, or at least if he has to be in somewhere where people work with their hands, he should be the inspector. All right, so that's the basic aspiration. But back in the day, there was this notion that we want Jews to fulfill all the positions of society. So we do not want non-Jews at all in the working field. They can work with themselves, but we want in our farms, in our factories, we want only Jews. Now, this also part of the ideological reason, there was also a security concern, because in 1936, we already begin about what is called Moraot Tartzav, which is the Great Arab Revolt, different names. So the Arabs are revolting against the British because the British have promised to establish a national homeland for the Jews in Palestine, in Eretz Israel, and the Arabs are not happy with that. And if they are revolting against the British, now it is difficult and unrewarding to kill British. So what is easier? It is easier, of course, to act against the Jews. And that's what they are doing, and Jews are being killed in many places. So you can all understand why now there is a security reason, why not to hire non-Jews to come in to the settlements on Shabbat in order to milk the cows, or for any other reason. So now there is a question. So the Jewish farmers are asking this question, what should they do? If we do not hire non-Jews in order to milk the cows, what can we do on Shabbat? And here there is a difference between the poskim. If you remember, Rav Uziel, which we spoke about before we spoke about the Chazon Ish, so 2 weeks ago, we spoke about Rav Uziel. Rav Uziel was a Sfaradi, he had the whole analysis of this question, and he issued a response, a tshuva, in which he said that in these circumstances in which we cannot hire non-Jews, then a Jew can milk the cow. We should do it in a different way, what we call a shinui. However, the bottom line was that you can milk the cows and later use the milk. That was the psika by Rav Uziel, who was the Rav Rashi. So that's an important psika. Chazon Ish issued an opposing ruling. And he said that it is preferred to do the milking by a non-Jew. However, if it is impossible for the reasons that we have given, then a Jew is allowed to milk the cow because of the tsar baalei chaim of the cow, but he is not allowed to use the milk. So the milk must all be thrown away, which is a major financial loss. Now, the question is, of course, who do you follow? And here you had a few settlements, which we can call Poalei Agudat Israel. These are the settlements that were established by Agudat Israel, what we would call today more the Haredi settlements, such as Chafetz Chaim, for example. So they followed the ruling of the Chazon Ish, spinning away the milk. Most of the settlements, most of the Jewish farmers, the Orthodox Jewish farmers, the observant Jewish farmers, followed the more lenient ruling. Now, there were many variations. We do not learn the halachic issue right now, so some variations were you should milk the first few drops on the floor, and then when you do not, so you only continue the act, so it's less of an issur, and then you are allowed to use the rest of the milk. And so were other variations. What is not less important than the halachic discussion is very important, and in a different shiur, of course, it can be explored. However, no less important was that what it created was maybe the first real difference between what you may call the Haredi settlement in Eretz Israel and what you can call the Mizrahi settlement in Eretz Israel. Those that follow the Chazon Ish would be seen as the more Haredi side, and those that followed Rav Uziel and many other poskim, Rav Uziel was not alone, and many other poskim would be seen as the Mizrahi side. And to this day, by the way, when you have a chalav, a regular kashrut chalav, and the mehadrin kashrut, one of the major differences between them is this exact question, because here in Eretz Israel, all the chalav is chalav Israel. So the question is not chalav Israel. The question is about what do you do with the milk on Shabbat. Now, the question is very different than what it was back then, because now we have automated machines. So it is much, much more, we can be much, much more lenient. It is interesting to note that the Chazon Ish himself, in his last years, had been shown this automatic machine and gave his supervision on one of these machines with, of course, a very specific setting in order to allow the milking on Shabbat with this machine. So that's just an interesting, I think, side note. But here you understand that I would use the word politics, but not in a derogatory way, as sometimes it's being using now. But there is here a political difference, and a halachic difference, which becomes a political difference. Because you identify yourself by the question of what do you do with the cows on Shabbat. It's not only how do you analyze the halachic material. It is who do you follow, in whose camp you are. And the Chazon Ish, I think it is important to say, he himself didn't see it only as a halachic disputation in the regular way that there are different halachic opinions. He tended to see the lenient position as not taking the halachic consideration seriously enough. So somewhat lightheaded, you may say. And that colored the way that he would see the Mizrahi and the Rabbanut Rashit and those that follow these opinions in the future. Obviously, it will not be the only reason why he came to this conclusion, but it became, as I said, not only, okay, we have here an halachic dispute and here an halachic dispute, but he came to see this whole camp as being lenient because they are not serious in their commitment to halacha. So the financial issue of milking or not milking on Shabbat is, in many senses, in many ways, became a fork in the road to the further development of the Orthodox society and communities on Eretz Israel. A few years later, 1938, Shemitah year. Now in Eretz Israel, for a few Shmitot already, they were using the Heter Mechira. I think I spoke about the Heter Mechira when you spoke about Rav Kook, so I don't want to go into the depth of the issues again. Very shortly, we can say that the Heter Mechira is based on the notion that you can sell the land before the Shemitah begins. You can sell it to a non-Jew. A land belonging to a non-Jew, even if it's in Eretz Israel, is not obligated in Shemitah. And so after you sold the land to a non-Jew, you can continue and work the land as a worker of the non-Jew, but basically everything more or less is continuing in the same way. And that was an heter that Rav Kook did not invent. It was before him, but he was the one to expand it and to allow the using it basically in almost in all of Eretz Israel. And Chazon in 1938, he is publishing another Chazon in his series of Sefarim called Chazon. So you have a Chazon on Shabbat, you have a Chazon on Chazon, Chazon. He publishes another one on Shvi'it, meaning on Shemitah. And he is vehemently opposed to the Heter Mechira. He opposes almost any assumption that is used in order to produce the Heter Mechira. He thinks that even if you sell the land to a non-Jew, it does not nullify the laws of Shemitah. So even if the land belonged to a non-Jew, even if it would have worked, it would have made no difference in the halacha. B says it is not allowed to sell lands in Eretz Israel to non-Jews. There is a mitzvah called lo techonem, that we should not give a parking, that is techonem, chanaya, but we should not give a residence in Eretz Israel to a non-Jew. So how can it be you are coming and you are saying that you are the settlers and you are settling Eretz Israel, you are building Eretz Israel, and you are selling the lands of Eretz Israel to non-Jews? So B says it's an issur, outright an issur. And then he says, C, even if you are now the whole way that the Heter Mechira works, it's not that a specific farmer sells a specific land to a non-Jew. We do it in the same way that we do Mechirat Chametz, meaning that all the farmers are making the Rabbanut Rashit their shaliach, their missionary, their messenger, delegate, and the Rav Rashi, as the delegate of all of the farmers in Eretz Israel, sell all of the land to a specific non-Jew. Yes. Yeah, of course you get it back. Yes, but the Mechira itself is complete. So, of course, it was part of the discussion. If you sell the land in order to buy it back, does it considered an issur? But that raises a lot of issues because you have a very delicate balance. If you say that you are not seriously selling, and that's why it is not an issur, so if you're not seriously selling, so what do you mean when you say that now the land belongs to a non-Jew? It's very similar to the question we are familiar with chametz, but with chametz there is no issur to sell chametz to a goy. And in Eretz Israel, there is an issue to sell the lands of Eretz Israel to a non-Jew. Now, again, I cannot go in depth into this question. These are fascinating questions that are very relevant to our day, not only regarding Shemitah. It can be any person that is selling his house, his home, his a land plot, and there is a non-Jew coming. Are you allowed to sell the land? So these are very deep questions. And should we see Muslims as is it a problem also to sell to Muslims? Why would be it not a problem? Because if we maybe think that it's only an asur to sell to non-Jews that are idol worshippers, then Muslims are not considered idol worshippers. So there are a lot of discussions from different angles. But the bottom line of Chazon Ish said that because it's an aveira to sell the land of Eretz Israel to a non-Jew, and we have a rule in halacha which is אין שליח לדבר עבירה. There is no delegation for making averot. So if I am telling my friend, go and murder someone, and he does it and murders him, then only he is to be blamed. Because in Avera, we only take into account the one that produced the Avera, that made the Avera with his own hands, and not the one that told him to do so, because you have a rule, divrei harav v'divrei atalmid divrei mishomim. Right? He cannot defend himself by saying that he heeded my words, because I would tell him, I told you to murder him, but God told you not to murder him. So you cannot rely on me in matters against the Kadosh Baruch Hu. So says the Chazon Ish, if you follow the logic, he says, so the Rabbanut Rashit really is a shaliach ledvar aveira. The Rabbanut is the shaliach of the farmers to sell their lands to a non-Jew. Now, there is no shaliach ledvar aveira, as we said, so the whole shlichut, this whole delegation, is cancelled, is void. So no land was really sold. So he said, even according to those that hold that land that belongs to a non-Jew, the laws of Shemitah do not apply to it, do not apply to it, here you should also agree, because it's an aveira to do the whole mechanism, then there is no hater at all for no opinion. That was the way that he saw it. And again, some farmers, very few, followed his position, and that meant that they did no work during the Shemitah on their lands, but the vast majority of the farmers followed the opinion of the Rabbanut Rashit. Rav Kook was not anymore around. He passed away in 1935. But this is Rav Herzog was the Rav Rashi of the time, continued in the same line, which is we use the Heter Mechira. The Heter Mechira is valid, and we are allowed to use it. And the Chazon Ish said every food would be asur le'achila. So the farmers must find the way that they should, that they would make some living. So maybe you would schnorr, they should find another parnasa. Be it as it may. But there is no heter mechira, and we also must find the ways that we can produce our own food or import our own food. Our own foods. So again, that was a pure halachic decision. But what it produced, as in with the cow's questions, it really produced the crystallization, you may say, of these two different camps. Because if we do not eat together, if our kashrut begins to be something that you do not eat from my kashrut, then that is the most obvious sign of different camps. And that is what was beginning to happen. So this line distinguishing between I would call it Mizrahi, just for the ease of use, and Haredi, for the ease of use of, I think we all are smart enough to understand that is much more varied, and also in this line, there are people that somehow have their 1 foot here and one leg there. However, the Tzioni, yes. Mafdal, which would be later called. Yes, but no one was, I don't think that no one ever even remembered that Mizrahi came from Merkaz Ruchani at that point in time. It was just called the Mizrahi. And on the other side, what we may call the Aguda. And that, the formation of these two camps, I think we all know. I'm not speaking about some ancient history. That's our life today. So this formation was crucial for the development of what we see today as the Orthodox Israeli world. Yes.
Does the farm that doesn't, that uses Heta and Mechira, in the other 6 years that's not Shemitah, is their crops also considered you shouldn't eat from there?
No, it was not to that extent, although if a tree was planted on Shnat Shemitah, then that would also cause a problem. So it may be that it did not create an issue, and to this day it does not create, the Haredi did not see it as complete issue to eat from fields that did not keep Shemitah in the years after. But it's something that would apply for both the Shemitah and the year after the Shemitah, because the fruits are still from after the Shemitah. And also, as I said, it's in the beginning that I need an Hechsher that does not give its stamp on this type of foods. So from now on, even in years that are not Shemitah, my Hechsher is different than your Hechsher. And the creation of these different Hechsherim is the beginning of this split and splitialization, which would happen again and again in the Mizrahi world, also in the Haredi world, because some of you that may have grown up in Bnei Brak or in these type of places know that in Bnei Brak itself, you have a Sheirit, you have Agudat Israel, you have Bells, you have the different Khatam Sofers. There is Khatam Sofer Bnei Brak, Khatam Sofer Petach Tikva. These are now, again, it's a very complicated topic, but what we see here is that it's splitting again and again and again and again.
From the beginning, is there any comments about them saying, well, this might happen, but it's worth it?
Yeah, I think not only that it's worth it, it's a bonus. It's a bonus because we distance ourselves from people that, as I said, if you see it only as an halachic disputation, a pure halachic disputation, then, okay, I have my own halachic position, you have your own halachic position, and if I come to eat by you, you'd not serve me what I don't want to eat. But if I hold that, I don't speak about you, but if I hold that my friend's halachic position is lenient not only because he analyzed the halachic text differently, he is lenient because he is not serious, because he is looking for ways to bypass halacha, then it may be a good thing that I would not be so good friends, close friends with such a bad influence.
Besides making friends, did they ever try to go to Rashi to you and say you're doing it wrong?
Of course. No, it's not. Chazon was not very much into arguing with people. He has even one letter in which he says that I'm paraphrasing, but he says my life experience taught me that it's very, very rare that someone is get convinced in argument. So I'm not used to give arguments to people, to argue with people,
but to avoid schisms, to avoid splits.
I'm not aware of him making a step in this direction. I will speak about maybe later about his meeting with Ben Gurion, which may be interesting in this respect. Now it's very important because I'm now, and I think I'm presenting a certain aspect of the Chazon Ish, which was he has a letter, again another letter, which I should maybe have quoted it. It's a very interesting letter. It's been learned in this day in the Olam HaCharedi. It's called Igeret HaKitzoniyut, the letter about extremism. And he says that he says people think that being moderate is a virtue. He says they are wrong. Being extreme is a virtue. It may be that for practical reasons, sometimes then you cannot completely fulfill the extreme position. That's fine. Throughout our history, there are different realistic, we may say, checks and balances which stop us from completely expressing our extremism. But we are extreme. We're extreme in our love of Hashem. We're extreme in our faithfulness to Torah and halacha, and we do not see moderation as a virtue. The letter is much longer, but I think that that's the gist of the word. So you understand that when that is your basic position, you are not so much inclined try and find ways to the middle. And he didn't look for it. He didn't see himself. The Mizrahi thought and saw themselves as acting in order to become part of the leadership in Eretz Israel, you have to make certain compromises. Yeah, it's a negative word, but we have that's basically the problem. So you have to make certain sacrifices in order to become part of this leadership, but then you'd be able to have much more influence. So you give and take. And the Chazon Ish was not interested to give, and he said, I'm going to create what I think is ideal, according, of course, to my abilities. Now, it is important for me to emphasize that while this was a very important side in his personality and his actions here in Eretz Israel, he did not see the general public, what would later be called the Chilonim. Back then, they were called the Chofshiim, or in Yiddish, it was called the Freier. So the free people, because free from Torah and mitzvot. So the Chofshiim. So he didn't see them. I mean, he has a very, let's see it inside. That's something I think that it is worth reading. And please. It's the same page from last week, if some of you kept it. Look at source Zayin. Source Zayin. That's from the Chazon Ish on Yoredea. And it doesn't really matter for us right now why did he come to this discussion, but he's discussing the question of what should be our relationship with people that are not observant. And you may recall that the Gemara says that if someone is an epicurus, is not a believer, is a heretic, then if he falls into a pit, we should not give him a ladder. Let him stay there. Says the Chazon Ish about that. So Zayin. ונראה, דאין דין מורידין, אלא בזמן שהשגחתו גלויה, כמו בזמן שהיו ניסים מצויים ומשמש בת קול, וצדיקי הדור היו תחת השגחה פרטית הנראית לעין כל. So the Chazon says, this halacha, that if someone is a heretic, we should even not save his life. That only applied to times in which faith was very apparent. Miracles were happening, and the tzaddikim were seen as the head of the generations. And in this atmosphere, if someone becomes a heretic, he says, הכופרים עזו בנלילזות מיוחדת. So you need to be very rotten in order to not believe when everyone around you has faith. So you are a Rasha Merusha. You are a especially evil person. And that is because בהטיית היצר לתאוות והפקרות, it must be that you're completely corrupted with desires. ואז היה ביאור רשעים גדרו של עולם. And then, causing the destruction of the evil ones would have really helped the world, correct the world. שהכל ידעו, כי הדחת הדור מביא פורענויות לעולם, מביא דבר וחרב ורב בעולם. So the existence of evil people, that brings punishments on the Jewish people. So all understood that if we are distancing, I'm using a more delicate word, so if we are distancing the evil ones from our midst, then everyone understood that's the good way to go, and that is for the health and the benefit of all. However, he says that was in the old times when miracles were happening and the tzaddikim were the leaders. אבל בזמן ההיעלם, but now in our times, this time of obscure, it's time in which God is in היעלם. He is hiding. ונכרתה האמונה מן דלת העם. And if you look at the message, the simple man, they don't have faith anymore. So that's just the default of, and he's writing that in the 30s. And he says, nowadays, נכרתה האמונה מנדלת העם. Most of the people that I look around, and I, of course, in Eretz Israel at the time, so the simple people, it's not that they were special Reshaim and their parents were religious and everyone around them are observant and they want to be in Efkeirut. No, that's not the case. That's just the flow. The flow now is that people are not observant. So he says, אין במעשה הורדה גדר הפרצה שיהיה בעיניהם כמעשה השחתה ואלימות חס וחלילה. He says, nowadays, if you would act against the non-observant and the non-believers, if you would act against them in, of course, in physical violence, but even in ways that are not harming them, but even not helping them, that in itself is השחתה ואלימות. כיוון שכל עצמנו לתקן, אין הדין נוהג בשעה שאין בו תיקון. This is the whole point of the laws that Chazal gave us against the non-observance was in case in which this act would be helpful. If it is not helpful, we should not act like that. Meaning there is no mitzvah in the Torah not to save the life of someone that is a heretic or that does not follow the halacha. It was a way that Chachamim, it was a weapon, you may say, that as long as it was successful, then we fought with it. But if this weapon now backfires, if it damages, because if that would be the way that we would act now, then it would not increase the emunah of people, it would decrease it. There is an interesting psika ruling by Reb Shlomo Zalman Auerbach. That's not the Chazon, someone else, but in the same spirit. And he says, according to the halacha, according to the Gemara, if I know that someone is not going to make a bracha rishona, I shouldn't give him food because I cause him to fail and I should not participate in the failure of a Jew. Reb Shlomo Zalman Auerbach says, in nowadays, if someone that is not observant would ask me for food and I would not give him, then maybe I prevented him from failing in not making bracha rishona, but I caused him to fail in a more severe avera of sinat Israel, of basis hatred. So it is better to give him the food if I am able to somehow convince him to eat, to make the bracha, then beautiful, and if not, at least it would create friendship, and maybe in the future it would cause him to repent. So in the long view, it is the preferred way. And basically that's what the Chazon says here now. So you see that it's very practical, it's very pragmatic. However, he says, I'm not going to sacrifice or to give any halachot. I am going to create here in Bnei Brak an ideal core of Torah learners, of halacha observers. The settlements around, those that follow me, would be an example of how you can follow halacha without any compromises, without any psharot, and still be functioning and if we cannot, then we cannot. But we will do our best. By the way, although he was very machmir on the heter mechira, he was somewhat more lenient than Rav Kook in some of the halachic details of what are you allowed to do in your field in time of Shemitah. And that is for a very simple reason. If you follow the heter mechira, you don't need to go so much into the details of what you are and not allowed to do in the field, because anyway, almost everything is allowed. However, if you do not let the use of heter mechira, so, okay, the farmer understands that he's not going to walk the field as every other year. But still, there are many questions. So should they completely abandon the trees and then they will be damaged beyond repair, and then for the next 3 years, maybe I won't have a field? So no, you are allowed to make sure that the trees would not be destroyed. At least, but now, where exactly does the line goes between keeping, maintaining, and improving? That's not it's a very complicated question. And the Chazon should go out. So this man that for weeks upon weeks would sit in his room and only learn Torah. That's what he liked to do. There are pictures of him going out to the fields in Chafetz Chaim and in other places, and they would show him the trees, they would show him the wheat, and he would give halacha according to what he saw. Beautiful pictures. He became, you may say that if we need, obviously this is a dramatization, but if we want to pinpoint a minute in time in which he became the Gadol Ador. So it was in 1941. Now, obviously, as you all know, in 1939, Second World War breaks. And in 1941, that's Barbarossa, the Germans attack Russia, they attack Poland, Eastern Poland, which is controlled by the Soviet Union, by Russia. And we know what they do with the Jews, they exterminate the Jews. And the leadership, the Torah leadership, the political leadership of European Jewry, almost in one day, completely disappears. Even the rabbis that survive, you don't have any more lines of communication. So the settlements in Eretz Israel remain now by themselves. And the greatest rabbi of Agudat Israel, but we may say that is for sure at the, if you would ask, I don't want to give a rabbanometer of Rav Herzog and Rav Uziel and the Chazon Ish, that's beyond me. I mean, there would be people that would be very easily give you the answer, but I don't want to, because I don't know. However, obviously is in the top three, right? Top five. And for Agudat Israel, he is the head. In 1941, you may know that the yeshiva of Mir was miraculously able to find their way through all of Russia, Soviet Union, and into Japan. So they land in China, in Shanghai. They land in Shanghai. And they recreate the yeshiva there. There are accounts that are written on it's fascinating. I highly recommend. It's so, and it's one story about these years, which is a story of hope and salvation, and not a story of despair and death, which is also nice to read. So they are there in China, and they have a question. The question is, what should we do on Yom Kippur? Now, what is the question? Why should be a problem with Yom Kippur? So you are for sure familiar with the concept of the date line. What is the Kav HaTarikh? The date line. So there is a certain line, which is an artificial line. There is no such a line. The Kadur HaAretz it's around, right? So there is no place you can put your finger and say the day begins from here. We just read on the Parsha, Va'izrach lo Hashemesh, right? For Yaakov. Now, what does it mean? Va'izrach lo. So the Ralbag says, every minute the sun is shining for someone else. Because there is always a sunrise somewhere in the world. That's just the way that the world is built. So the question is, when do we begin the day? Because there must be a point in which you say that this is the line, left to it, it's Sunday, but right to it, it's Shabbat, right? Because I think we all, okay, I hope that I'm able to explain myself correctly. So there is a certain line that there is a whole 24 hours gap between its two sides. And that is just, we are forced to assume such a line. And the question is where this line goes. There is no, as I said, there is no way, it's a question of definition. There is no way, it's not a scientific question. Where do you put the line? It's arbitrary. Thank you, that's right. Thank you so much. It's arbitrary. So the Goyim had their own line. They decided about the line, fine. What is our line? That was the question. What is our line? Where should our line go? Now, as long as Jews lived in Europe or in Asia or in Africa, no one asked the question. It was assumed that the line is somewhere on the second side of the world. And that was good enough. But now the Jews came to the second side of the world. Now you have to make a decision. Now, to be honest, there were Jews in China before. Mostly Iraqi Jews. We spoke about the Ben Ish Chai, we spoke about Rabbi Abdallah Somech, who sent answers to China. Sassoon, that's right, the family of Sassoon. But they just assumed that whatever the non-Jews see as the day, that is the day. So they just kept the date around according to the non-Jews. So there was no question was aroused. But now that the Ashkenazim are coming, the Ashkenazim always have doubts, right? So they come in and they have a doubt. Now, as long as we spoke about Shabbat, it's also a problem about Shabbat, but Shabbat you can just keep 2 days. I think you all know it from Chutz La'aretz. You can keep 2 days, not for Shabbat, for Yom Tov. But for Shabbat, it is feasible. Not convenient, but feasible. What about Yom Kippur? Keeping Yom Kippur for 2 days, that's a challenge. So they send the question to Eretz Israel. In Europe, there is no one to send the question anymore. They send the question to Eretz Israel. And Rav Herzog makes a convention of rabbis. They sit on Tzom Gedalia, a few dozen rabbis, and there is a notion of the Sanhedrin may be reborn, because the Chachamim of Yahadut convene in Eretz Israel, in Yerushalayim, and discuss halachic question which apply to the whole world, Ki mitzion tetzeh Torah. Really beautiful. And they come to the conclusion that Wednesday is the right day. I mean, the question there was, should they fast on Wednesday or on Thursday? And they came to the conclusion that they should follow Wednesday. The Chazon Ish does not participate in the convention. There is no place in which his reason is being given. I mean, there are many speculations, but he doesn't write his reason. He was invited and he decided not to come. Maybe because he didn't want to sit under the chief rabbi, because he didn't see the chief rabbinate as something that is mandatory or obligative. That's a word. Obligatory. So maybe that was the problem. Maybe the problem was that he didn't believe in arguing, as I said earlier. Or maybe some other reason that we don't know. Maybe just his health didn't let him to go. However, what he does do is going to the telegraph agency in Bnei Brak, and he sends his own telegraph to Shanghai, in which he says, it's in source Vav, very, very quick. You know, a telegraph must be short. Achim yekarim, dear brothers, יחלו ברביעי וצומו תענית יום כיפור ביום החמישי. Eat on Wednesday, fast on Thursday, ואל תחושו לשום דבר. And don't be worried about anything. Anything, obviously, here is the rabbis that gave the psika that you should fast on Wednesday. Now, you need to be the Chazon Ish in order to do so. Of course, that's not just a whim. You understand that he said there are pages upon pages about this psika, which I don't even begin. I would, very honestly, I would say, begin to understand that I cannot wrap my head around this whole geometric question and things. so I need to sit with a globe just to understand the question. And he was, obviously, he had a mind which was 1,000 years, light years ahead of mine. I mean, that's not a question even. So it's not a whim. It's a mathematical and also an halachic and also a text trying to analysis and to extract the answer from text that doesn't really give it. So that requires brilliancy and it requires mathematics and also it requires just sheer courage.
Who did they actually ask?
Almost, these were hundreds of students, and it seems that the questions went everywhere. But it was understood that, at least by the Rabbanut Rashit, that if they have a convention, then they give a unified answer instead of having many answers and different people having Yom Kippur in different days, which is, mean, you understand the problem. So, yes. I am not where, I just don't know enough. It seems that the Rashi issue, we have to understand that from the beginning of the 20th century, the role of the Rosh Yeshiva and the role of the Posek became very differentiated. And to this day, you have Rashi Yeshivot, Chach of Rashi Yeshivot, which maybe can give psak halacha on this or that. But if they would have such a question, then they would refer it to professional halachic decision, to professional poskim. Again, I'm not knowing well enough to say that for sure, but I would assume that that was the reason why they sent the question. Yes. Okay, so in the end, now, as you can understand, some kept that way and some kept that, and there were a few that tried to keep both. But you could understand. I mean, knowing yeshiva students, I would have said, even before sending the question, I would have told you that would be the outcome. But his halachic position is not accepted nowadays. However, even among many of the Haredim, some of them just try to avoid being on the places which are in doubt on Shabbatot and Yamim Tovim, which is, if you are just a regular Haredi in yeshiva, I mean, what do you have to look for in Shanghai? So it's not such a problem. But people that are there usually follow the line of the Rabbanut Rashit. However, this ability to stand up made, and again, not just giving you on a whim, but giving a very based and expanded tshuva, and also having the, I don't know if courage is the right word, but the strength to say, I have the authority, and I give you the answer, and I'm telling you that you do not have to fear any other position. That, again, I'm dramatizing. Obviously, it's a dramatization, because it was not just born out of nowhere. We just spoke about the cows question and the Shemitah question. But that made him a formidable halachic authority throughout the whole world, you may say, throughout the whole globe. So that's on 1941. What he also is doing during these years, he understands that the Torah centers of Europe, as I said, are destroyed. And the Torah must be reborn in Eretz Israel. However, the state of Torah in Eretz Israel at the time is meager, to say the least. You have a few yeshivot in Yerushalayim. The study of Torah level in them was not very high. I think, did I spoke about Rabbi Zalman Meltzer, about him coming to Yerushalayim, and he gave a shiur klali, a very high-level Lithuanian shiur klali. And the students said, according to the story, the students in Yerushalayim sitting there don't understand anything because they were used just to learn, on the page. And he's giving a very in-depth shiur, and he finished the shiur, they all sit and stare, and then just one person stands up and begins to recite the Kaddish. So that's the story. There's a Kaddish de Rabbanan. It's not such a, it's like sometimes in Bet Knesset, right? You have a shiur, and in the end, someone says a Kaddish, okay, but no one is asking any question, no comments, no anything, no one understood anything. So that was the level, I am oversimplifying, but to a large extent, that was the level of Torah learning in Eretz Israel. If you have great rabbis in Eretz Israel, it's because they learned in Chutz La'aretz and came to Eretz Israel. And the Chazon Ish is decisive. He is going to change the situation completely. And he begins to open yeshivot. Again, not he himself. He was not a Rosh Yeshiva. That was not his style. But now he has a fellowship. He has students. He has people that would go after him in fire and water. And he is beginning to send them to open yeshivot. Just an interesting fact. Yeshivat Kerem Beyavne, you would not in any way identify it with the Chazon Ish. But Rav Goldwicht, that's the mythological Rosh Yeshiva of Kerem Beyavne, was sent to there by the Chazon Ish. So again, he himself said, I am passing for my people, for my camp. But that doesn't mean that I am not willing or wanting and seeing it as extremely important to encourage Torah learning in any camp in Eretz Israel. So Kerem Beyavne and Hesder Yeshiva was established, maybe the first Hesder Yeshiva. That's a question that is arguable. In the place I'm coming from, in Eretz Zion, we argue that we are the first Hesder Yeshiva. However, it is an Hesder Yeshiva, and in a sense, it was not established by the Chazon Ish. We need to be careful with that, but the Rosh Yeshiva was sent by the Chazon Ish. So that's you may say, the scope of his effect on Torah learning in Eretz Israel. In 1945, is a known and recognized political figure in the sense that he is a leading of a society, of a community, not only of communities of the Haredi world. And as such, for example, when the question becomes, it's 1945, Second World War is over, and there begin to be voices about maybe fixing a fast day because of the Shoah. It should be a fast day, a yearly fast day for the Shoah, for the Holocaust. He opposed that. Look at source Het. That's a letter he wrote. He says, ענייני ההלכה קבועים הם על פי התורה. So every issue of halacha is set by the Torah. עיקרן בכתב, פירושן בתורה שבעל פה, so the oral Torah, the written Torah, ואף נביא אינו רשאי לחדש. Even a prophet is not allowed to make any new commandment. And as taking off a mitzvah is a sin against the Torah, so adding a mitzvah, he says, is a sin against the Torah. And he says the proposition, he says even the proposition to begin, להיכנס, to gather, לקבוע, and to set, ולעשות, and to perform, לגזור ולקיים, to have a decree, זה rabbinical decree, כהקלת ראש חס וחלילה ביסוד ההלכה. That is again, lightheadedness. He sees, for him, there is a straight line. What I'm going to say now would sound ridiculous, but try to catch the hit. He sees a direct line between milking a cow on Shabbat and fixing a fast day for the Holocaust. Because both of them represent lightheadedness in the seriousness of halacha. You think you can do whatever you want. You'd make what you want. You'd say you want a fast day, you'd have a fast day. The question is not do you extract or do you add? The question is, are you serious about following the halachic concepts? And for him, both of these ideas reflect the same lack of seriousness. He says it would be better not even to have the proposition, because even the proposition itself, it's an insult. And then he adds, in our generation, even in a generation with prophets, it's a question that is not simple. But in our generation, proposing such a to have for generation that we, our poor generation, we, with our lack of Torah, we would set a decree that would affect for generations to come. Who are we? Who do you think you are? No, it doesn't say that, but that's the obvious outcome. Who do we think we are? That's a complicated question. As I think we all feel, there is a validity to his argument, but on the other hand, the bottom line that the Shoah would just happen and there would be nothing in our religious life that would commemorate it. So it just didn't happen. That is also impossible. So it doesn't address that in this letter. However, it is clear that he saw for him, there is another letter here in source letter. We don't read it because our time is not short, it's done. But that's a letter for the establishment of Yeshiva Tzlonim. And he writes, he encourages them for the opening of the yeshiva, etc. And then he writes that he's especially happy that the yeshiva is called Tzlonim, because it says that represents the rebirth of the Torah that was destroyed there, here in Eretz Israel. So for him, it's not about setting a fast day. It's about the opening of Ponovich, which he also encouraged Rav Kahanaman that came after the Shoah was completely broken. And because he lost the Ponovich of the real Ponovich, the original Ponovich, and he encouraged him to reopen with 6 students. We know what Ponovich is nowadays, but he encouraged him to open it with 6 students in Bnei Brak and many other yeshivot. And as I think I mentioned last week, his door was always open to young boys and teens that even those that maybe were not so much aligned with his worldview. And I think I mentioned my father, Zichrono Livracha, that received the bracha from the Chazon Ish. His father took him, my grandfather, took him to the Chazon Ish, and he would tell the story again. Now, my father was not necessarily, I don't think that the Chazon Ish, if would have been asked, would say, my father went to the army. Not necessarily what the Chazon Ish show is an exemplary resident of Bnei Brak, of the way that the Chazon Ish saw Bnei Brak. But he was happy to give him a bracha because he was happy to see young Jewish boys in Eretz Israel. So that's complicated. He had very strong opinions, and he thought that the Haredi community should be, as I said, the model for complete adherence to Torah, no compromises, extremism in ideal. On the other hand, very warm and open to every Jew as a Jew. And I think that's a sign. Yeah, with 800 years between them. But you say no, it's not Shvil Hazav. No, for sure no. That he speaks. I don't know. He didn't write. He didn't write. Yes. So that's 2 last stories I want to tell, and I apologize that we are, but I think it's worth a few minutes being late. So I apologize. Just a few short stories. One is that in 1952, now I'm skipping. There are a few more very interesting stories here, but that I have to skip about his opinions about electricity. He opposed Gius for the army. And he opposed the recruitment of boys who are learning in the yeshiva. If they do not learn, he thought that they should be recruited. That's not the position nowadays. That was his position. So if they are learning, they should be exempt. And he was vehemently opposed the use of women, of girls. That he thought it's yareg ve'al yavor. It's better to die. That was his position. And when a certain rabbi came to him and asked him, where is it written in the Shulchan Aruch? He said, how many volumes of Shulchan Aruch do you have? So this rabbi told him, we have 4 volumes of Shulchan Aruch. He said, so I have a 5th one. And it's written there. That's... Now, in 1952, David Ben-Gurion understood the first government fell because of the planes on Shabbat, and David Ben-Gurion understood that in order to rule here, he must come to terms with the Haredim. And he asked, who is the leader? Because obviously he understood that the people in the Knesset, everything that he speaks with them, they say, we need to go back and ask. So he says, okay, so who is the boss? Who should he speak with? And in the end, he finds himself coming to Bnei Brak, to the very, very humble apartment of the Chazon Ish. And Ben-Gurion comes in, and we have some testimonies from this meeting, and obviously that's, again, it's fascinating, but it's beyond our scope to speak about everything that happened there. But one story became a foundational story for the Haredi world. And that is that David Ben-Gurion asked Chazon Ish, in the end, both communities live here. How can we live? We must live together. And the Chazon Ish answered him that there is an halacha in the Talmud. When 2 wagons come on a narrow road, and one is full, loaded, and the other is empty, then the empty one should go to the side, so the loaded one can continue. And then the empty one can come back to the road. The obvious conclusion is that we, the Haredi world, we have on our back traditions of thousands of years. And the Torah world in Europe was destroyed. So we are the only ones that carry them now. What you have in relation to us is emptiness. So you must clear the road so we would be able to go on. And if it means that you would recruit to the army and not us, then as long as this is studying Torah, then he should be exempt. Now, there are big disputations. What did the Ben Gurion answer to that? But the Haredim end the story here. So for the legacy of the Chazon Ish, that's the story which capsulates his position about the wagon that is loaded, Ha'agala Melea, as it is called in Hebrew. In 1953, he passed away in Bnei Brak. And his legacy, there is a Kollel Chazon Ish, which is a Kollel that he established. But obviously his legacy is much, much beyond a few what is called nowadays Chazon Ishniks, right? That follow his narrow halachic rulings. Because not his rulings, but his mindset, which created the Haredi world as we know it today, but also affected the Torah world in Eretz Israel in general, is what is, I think, what we really have that remained from him. This is a small, so that was the first story, Ben Gurion. The second story is a personal story. I began with a personal story about my father. I want to finish with my own personal story. That's Chazon Ish called Emunah B'Bitachon. It's a small book that he authored about faith and trust. It's not even finished. It's not completed. It's 5.5 chapters. He didn't finish the 6th one. And that's this specific volume I bought during the war in one of my vacations, and I took it with me to the tank. And this is writings which I wrote. I summarized to myself while learning in the tank, in the war. Because as much as the Chazon Ish was against maybe Giyus, as I said, his words about what does it mean to have faith? What does it mean to trust? What does it mean to be with Agala Melea, to know that you carry the Torah with you? These words, which I think, these ideas which shine through every word in this small sefer, which by the way is very readable. And I would, Be'ezrat Hashem, I would send you a link. It's completely online. You can find it for free online בעברית. I am sure that there is some English translation to that. It shines through every word. You don't have to agree with every position or every halacha, but you can be, I think, extremely inspired by a person that was completely devoted to Torah and mostly to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. So thank you, and we will continue Be'ezrat Hashem with another hero next week.
But if you talked about halacha, which was